GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. No, it's not you. Why would you think that? GDP serves as a yardstick to measure the economic health of the nation. It is widely used as an indicator by almost all nations of the world. It is defined as the total monetary or market value of all finished goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. So to simplify, GDP is the total money spent on all goods and services produced within the country during that particular year. Or alternatively, it can also be defined as the total money earned by selling those goods and services within the country during that particular year. The idea for GDP stemmed from the necessity of an indicator to represent the economic condition of the US following the Great Depression of 1929. Prior to that, economists and policymakers relied on industrial production data and stock numbers to give them a picture of the nation's economic health. In 1937, Simon Kuznets, a US economist, formulated an indicator in his report to the Congress titled National Income 1929 to 1932. This would capture all economic production by individuals, companies, and the government in a single measure. The use of this idea was extended as a measurement of economic health for all the countries of the world in the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, which was attended by delegates of 44 allied nations. This conference was called to set up a system of new rules, regulation, and procedure for the major economies of the world following the Second World War to ensure their economic stability. This conference also established the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. There are mainly three ways to calculate the GDP of the nation: the expenditure method, income method, and the value-added method. First, the expenditure method. This is the formula to calculate the GDP using expenditure method. Here, C stands for consumer consumption of all finished goods and services in the country. This is anything bought by the general public. This, however, does not include intermediary goods. For example, a person buying a cake for consumption will be included, but a baker buying flour to bake the cake won't be included, cause this flour will be processed and further resold. So it's not a finished product. It will be finished product when it's sold as a cake. Similarly, a person buying flour to bake the cake in their own house will be included, as here flour acts as an end product. Second-hand and refurbished items won't be included. Only new finished goods and services produced within the financial year are counted. I signifies the investments by businesses and private firms. So for example, a business buying a new space for work will be calculated. Also, the machinery needed to run these businesses like computers and air conditioning machines will be counted. G represents the government spending on goods and services. This would be the amount spent by governments for providing essential commodities, healthcare, infrastructure, education, and other necessities to its citizens. And then finally, we have the net exports. The difference in the value of a country's total exports and total imports in one fiscal year is termed as net exports. In the formula, X represents gross exports, whereas M represents gross imports. Exports are regarded as economy's output, while imports are regarded as expenses since they are produced outside the national boundaries of the country. Another way of calculating GDP is the income method. In this method, GDP is calculated by summing up the incomes from all factors of production. Factors of production are inputs which goes into producing final goods and services. The main four factors are namely land, labor, capital, and management. We calculate the income from these factors, namely rent from land, wages from labor, interest from capital, and the total profits earned by the business management. The summation of all these incomes would give us the national income. To get a gross value, we need to add the depreciation, that is, the value a capital loses in time. We also have to add the net foreign factor income. The net foreign factor income is the income earned by the rest of the world within the country minus the income earned by the country in the rest of the world. To this we add the indirect taxes earned by the government minus the subsidies the government provides to subsidize various goods and services for its citizens. Thus, the total GDP by income method would be the national income plus the depreciation plus net foreign income plus indirect taxes minus subsidies. Then the third method to calculate GDP would be the production method, also known as the value-added approach method. This method calculates the total output of all industries within the country. Each product goes through a different industry before it's finally completed, like from agriculture to industrial to the retail sector. In this method, we segregate the value added by each industry to make the final product. For example, let's say the cost of producing one pair of jeans is $50. To produce this pair, we need the cotton as raw material, say $10. This would be sent to the factory to produce the jeans at a total of $30. These jeans would then be sold at the store for a total of $50. So the value added by each industry is calculated by subtracting the cost from the previous industry. So in this case, the farmer has added a value of $10. The value added by the factory would be 30 minus 10, that is $20. Similarly, the value added by the store would be 50 minus 30, that would be $20. Take another product, say bread. The farmer grows the wheat, gives it to the bread factory who bakes the bread, and then it's sold at the general food store. Thus, each industry will add a separate value to the end product. Adding this total value would get you the total output of the country. An advantage of this method is that we can actually study the performances of each sector. Now, who calculates the GDP of a nation? Now, each country have their own statistical department which undertakes surveys of different industries and also gathers data through tax returns to calculate the GDP of the nation. Some countries use more than one method to be more accurate, and also because different methods also show the performance of different sectors and people groups. Now, when we talk about the total GDP of the country, we state it in terms of nominal GDP. However, when we talk of GDP growth of a nation, we refer to the change in real GDP. Real GDP differs from the normal GDP as it takes into account inflation. For example, let's consider a shirt in the year 2010 costed around $10. The same shirt cause of inflation costed $11 in 2011. Suppose the country just produced 10 shirts. The nominal GDP would be 10 into 10, that would be a total of $100. And in 2011, the country again just produced just 10 shirts. The normal GDP would be 11 into 10, that would be $110. So we could say the GDP of the nation grew by 10%, but in actual, there was no growth in terms of production, but only the value of the shirt. It was not because more was created, it was because the dollar depreciated. Thus, to negate the effect of inflation, we calculate the GDP on the prices of a set base year. Let's consider the base year as the year 2000. The price of the shirt in the year 2000 was $5. Therefore, the real GDP of the country in 2010 would be $50. Similarly, the real GDP of the country in 2011 would also be $50. Therefore, the total growth of the country would be 0%. Since there is no difference in the amount of production, there is no real growth. Now, for the same example, if 15 shirts were produced in 2011, the real GDP would be $75. That would be a $25 increase, so a total growth of 50%. GDP growth of a nation is always considered to be more important than the total GDP, as it indicates that the people are willing to spend more every year and that companies can invest in the country to take advantage of the untapped potential and grow with it. Developed nations tend to have a low GDP growth, indicating that the market might be a bit saturated. Whereas developing nations have a high growth rate as they have a high potential to grow in terms of their untapped markets. GDP growth charts also serve as indicators. For example, if the rate of GDP declines for 2 consecutive quarters, it is called a recession. Also, it is noticed that whenever there is a drop in GDP growth, the unemployment increases. GDP is a useful indicator of a nation's economic performance, and it is the most commonly used measure of well-being. However, it has some important limitations. Underground markets, which are predominantly cash-based, are not calculated in GDP, which results in inaccuracies. It doesn't represent the degree of income inequality in the society. It fails to indicate whether the nation's rate of growth is sustainable or not. However, GDP will probably be used as an indicator for years to come, as it is relatively easier to quantify and reliable in determining the overall economic health of the nation. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, as we will be releasing one video every week. See you in the next one.